Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. With the rapidly emerging field of precision medicine, more complex and expensive and promising genetic and genomic tests are being developed to identify biomarkers that can help inform treatment and care, currently most prominently in the field of oncology. Today, we're going to share our progress that's been made in standing up a time-limited advisory panel tasked with developing a consensus-based assessment framework to support standardized, efficient, and transparent assessment of genetic and genomic biomarkers in cancer care across Canada. At the end of today's session, we hope you'll understand the scope of this work and how you can provide feedback on the draft framework, which is anticipated to be available for your comments in June or July 2025. Next slide. My name's Tamara Rader, and I would like to begin with a territorial acknowledgement. I'm located on the area we now call Ottawa, which is the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. If you've been to this place, you know how important the Ottawa River is to our geography. And where I live is actually quite close to where the Rideau River flows into the Ottawa River. And when I'm out walking along, I often reflect and I'm reminded that the Anishinaabe people are the traditional keepers of this local watershed since time before recorded history. So I encourage you all to reflect similarly on the land where you live. And we're glad to have participants here from many beautiful places across Canada. So please feel free to share where you are in the chat if you wish. And as a personal act of reconciliation today, and every time I have an opportunity to make a land acknowledgement, I make a donation here to Minawashin Lodge, which is a women's shelter and provides women's support services for people who are sort of affected by domestic violence and are maybe feeling the effects of the other forms of violence, feeling the effects of the residential school system. These small collective actions by individuals can have a big impact. Thank you. Next slide. Today, we're glad to be able to share simultaneous interpretation and captioning. So my colleagues from the events team have put a link in the chat there. The link will open in a new browser. You might need to refresh your browser if you're not able to choose the language, but once you put it in the new browser, you'll be able to select the language of your choice. And if you have any trouble, please reach out to the CDA AMC events person in the chat there, and they'll try and help as well. Thank you. Now I would like to introduce Laura Weeks. Laura is the Director of Health Technology Assessment in the Evidence Products and Services Department of Canada's Drug Agency. Laura?
Great. Thanks so much for the nice introduction, Tamara. And thanks to everyone who was able to join today. And thanks for your interest to hear more about our work to support the development of a consensus-based assessment framework to support decisions on the adoption and funding of testing for biomarkers in cancer care. To begin, and as Tamara has already alluded, we've entered the age of precision medicine. We are seeing more complex drug treatments emerge that are tailored for individuals with particular genetic or genomic profiles, and the understanding of individuals' genetic makeup now inform a range of therapeutic decisions. It really is an exciting time in care where we have the potential to observe enhanced patient outcomes and reduce adverse effects by offering targeted therapies to the right person at the right time. That said, precision medicine is a process and requires not only safe, effective, targeted therapies, but we also require access to biomarker testing to determine an individual's genetic profile, for example, to identify who might be eligible or not for different targeted therapies, and otherwise to tailor treatment, based on genetic information. And it's only when this process comes together that we can realize the potential benefits of precision medicine. Our systems at the moment expose some potential gaps within this process, which is a primary driver for the work that we will discuss today. As I'm sure most of you joining today are aware, in Canada, we do have a relatively well-defined process that guides regulatory and reimbursement decisions for novel drug therapies, but that's not necessarily the case for associated testing requirements that support the appropriate use of those novel drug therapies. Next slide, please. So to inform our work, we conducted an environmental scan that was published in March of this year. And we were looking at existing biomarker assessment practices, criteria, and frameworks that are used across the country. And what we identified is that processes varied across different provinces and territories, and at times even within the same jurisdiction. We learned that many or all jurisdictions acknowledge the need for a process to inform the assessment of biomarkers, to inform adoption and funding decisions, and that some are further ahead than others in their implementation of such a process. We heard that there are common challenges across jurisdictions. For example, that there are typically different funders and decision makers that support decisions about targeted therapies, for example, a novel drug, and the biomarker testing requirements. And we learned as well that systems are not always aligned or coordinated. And really why this matters is that it can limit access or timely access, equitable access to novel drug treatments and other targeted therapies, which can limit equitable opportunities to experience the potential benefits of precision medicine. Next slide, please. So it's within this context that we have stood up our advisory panel and are supporting the development of a consensus-based assessment framework to help inform decisions around the funding and adoption of testing for various biomarkers in cancer care. So this is the primary objective of the advisory panel, who also has secondary objectives to share best practices and learn from one another, to support implementation of the framework within jurisdictions, and also to engage interested parties across jurisdictions to build consensus. I will have a more detailed timeline slide in just 1 minute, but for now, just will flag that we anticipate that the framework will be ready for implementation within jurisdictions in the fall of this year, targeting September as a starting point for that discussion. Next slide, please. I did want to give kudos and thanks to our great advisory panel, who have been nothing short of an engaged and thoughtful group. When identifying members for the panel, we were very intentional in our approach to identify people with a diversity in roles and perspectives across the health system, while ensuring diversity across jurisdictions and other dimensions of difference, but also a manageable panel size. So in the end, in total, we engaged 14 members, including a chair, plus one observer from INES. The next slide, please. On this slide, I wish to describe some of what was considered in and out of scope for the panel. For example, the panel considered all types of biomarkers to be in scope, so predictive and prognostic biomarkers, those that might be used to detect disease recurrence or to monitor treatment response, including both germline and hereditary mutations. We intend the framework to support decisions about biomarker testing that's not yet standard of care, so for new and novel biomarkers, and also to support decisions about existing biomarker testing. So for example, to revisit decisions about the use of existing tests, or to potentially reassess or support decisions about testing for a new indication based on a biomarker that might already be tested for in certain scenarios. We do not intend the framework to support any decisions about the location of testing. So for example, within a province or whether a test should be conducted out of jurisdiction. The criteria that we put forward will inform assessment of adoption and funding decisions for particular biomarkers, but will not be informing any recommendations about how that testing should occur. So for example, based on what test platform or what assay, for example. And last, we do expect the framework may lead to the identification of some implementation considerations, but we wouldn't expect the framework to lead to any implementation rules or requirements, for example. I will also clarify that the framework is intended to be implemented within jurisdictions, adopted within existing processes to support a more coordinated or consistent approach. We are supporting the development of the framework from a pan-Canadian perspective, acknowledging the challenges that we have already discussed from a consistency and transparency lens, for example, but the scope would be for the jurisdictions to implement the final product if they wish. Last, and before opening the floor to hear from your questions and comments, I just wanted to overview the process that the panel is taking to support framework development. So just one more slide, please. Next slide. So first, we've set out a schedule of 4 almost monthly meetings beginning in late February, and with the last meeting approaching at the beginning of June. For each of the meetings, Canada's Drug Agency staff has developed a set of materials to support the advisory panel discussions, building from input received from the panel throughout the course of their work. The meetings and content have built from one another, progressing through a discussion of scope, current practices, and opportunities to learn from one another to a draft framework, and then working towards a final draft in early June. We acknowledge that there is a diversity of interested parties that are relevant to this work and wanted to provide ample opportunity to hear from everyone that has an interest. And so we will have an extended feedback period over the course of the summer months, after which we will revisit the draft based on the feedback received before finalizing the framework in September, and then shifting the conversation to one around implementation of the framework within jurisdictions. So with that, I will close the formal presentation component of our discussion and open the floor to hear from you. So thanks to everyone for your attention. I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thanks a lot, Laura. That was a great overview. Perhaps I'll start with a question. So the framework is intended to support assessment of cancer biomarkers. Are there plans to support decision-making of other types of biomarkers for other purposes or other conditions?
No, that's a great question. Thanks, Tamara. So yes, you're exactly right. We began with the framework to support the assessment of cancer biomarkers, as this really is the field where the majority of drugs with companion diagnostics are emerging. We do appreciate that there are biomarkers used in a variety of different fields, and anticipate that we will learn from the process of cancer biomarker assessment and be able to apply those lessons to other fields in the future. So this is the starting point. Yeah.
That's great. We have a question. How have or will the jurisdictions be involved in the panel's work?
Great question. So primarily, we have aimed for broad representation across jurisdictions when we were putting the advisory panel member together. So we do have representation across most jurisdictions. PEI is notably not part of the panel, and unfortunately couldn't obtain representation from the territories either, but all other jurisdictions are represented. So we do feel that we have a good pan-Canadian perspectives contributing to the establishment of the framework. We have also engaged across all of the jurisdictions, including Nunavut, when we conducted our environmental scan. So we have had conversations with individuals who are currently responsible for these decision-making processes within their respective jurisdictions. Yeah, and that showed up in the environmental scan that is informing our work, and including conversation around current assessment practices to support that cross-learning and identification of any best practices that we might leverage at the pan-Canadian level.
Thanks, Laura. Hopefully that answers your question. I see one in the chat, which I think we'll go to so it doesn't get forgotten here. Would this framework apply to diagnostic genetic testing as well, e.g. hereditary cancer testing?
Yes, absolutely. So we have in scope for the assessment framework is any type of biomarker testing at the moment. So including diagnostic testing, predictive and prognostic testing, monitoring treatment over time, and both germline and somatic mutations. So all types of biomarkers and purposes in cancer care are currently in scope.
Right, thanks. Hopefully that answers the question, but definitely feel free to put some follow-up questions there. Another question, are you considering other additional signatures, for example, TMB, MSI, that are growing in significance as part of the genomic testing in oncology?
So yes, I think this would fall into the category of any biomarker. So I know I probably spoke a bit in my introduction about the companion diagnostics and the relationship between companion diagnostic testing and access to treatment, but all biomarkers all biomarker testing would be in scope. Um, so yeah, those would fall within consideration.
Thanks, Laura. I have another about the scope and then another about relationship to provincial testing. So I think I'll go with the scope while we're on that and then come to the next question. Given that there's such a variability in testing, will the consensus consider tissue/liquid testing, germline versus acquired mutations, etc.? Additionally, is the project focused to just Canada, or will you be exploring global approaches to testing?
So to answer the question about the tissue liquid, for example, we have left those sorts of discussions out of scope at the moment. We have heard from the jurisdictions that decisions about how to actually perform testing are very context specific and depending on the infrastructure and current capacity, and so have determined that those sorts of discussions would be out of scope for the assessment framework. And to answer the question about Canada or international, currently the focus is to implement the framework just within Canada on its own. I could anticipate that as part of any assessments that might flow, we would look at just practices outside of Canada as well, but the framework itself is intended for application in Canada.
Thanks, Laura. One question about its relation to the provincial health technology assessment process. So the question is this framework related to the provincial health technology assessment process?
I'm curious, I guess, what provincial HTA
Yeah,
process in particular. I can speak. So Ontario. So I'm just seeing that comment, sorry, clarified in the chat as well.
yeah,
Yeah, so no, this is super. So we have been engaged with Ontario throughout development of the framework. We do have representation from Ontario on the advisory panel, and those discussions about how we might implement or integrate within existing processes, those are to come once the framework is available. Very aware of OTAC and OGAC and the strong HTA processes existing in Ontario. And so I think what you're flagging in terms of that relationship is more of a follow-up implementation conversation to happen in the fall.
right. I wonder, Laura, if it's related to this question. How will the consensus-based assessment framework be used by decision makers?
No, that's a great question. So currently, these decisions do rest within the jurisdictions, and that is the intention for this framework as well. We would anticipate that decision-making for recommendations and for implementation of various biomarkers would rest within the jurisdictions. We have heard some comments about, I guess, Canada's Drug Agency potentially taking on this assessment process, but that's currently out of scope. So the decision-making framework or the assessment framework that we are currently developing the intention is for it to be implemented within jurisdictions who wish to take it up and support that implementation as a next step.
Great. There's a follow-up question about the role of CDA-AMC, the role of Canada's Drug Agency, but I think you answered it there. Would you like to add anything to that? What is our role as an agency?
Yeah, I mean, our role as an agency at this moment is to support consistency across the jurisdictions. So we have been leading the development of this framework at a pan-Canadian level, understanding that there is current differences in terms of transparency and consistency and standardization across jurisdictions. And so we have convened partners from across the country to make, I think, the important step of coming up with consensus about how those decisions might best be informed by evidence-informed criteria. But in the scope of the work at the current moment is to take the framework and have that supported by jurisdictions. Again, we have heard signals that this could be a potential role for the organization to take on, but that is currently out of our scope.
Thanks, Laura. Let people type in any others they have. And also, if anybody wants to go back to previous slides, just let us know. We can review anything or recover anything that you wanted to add. Laura, while we wait for more questions to come in, was there anything you wanted to add about the scope, what's in, what's out, or do you feel that that's been anything that we haven't mentioned yet already?
It's a good question. I mean, I've been living and breathing it for a while, so I hope that I've been clear in terms of what is in and what is out of scope. What we have focused on for the assessment framework is kind of some earlier steps within the assessment process. So thinking about how to identify biomarkers that we might consider for assessment, as well as the specific evidence criteria by which the assessments could be made. We have left out of scope sort of subsequent parts of that process, again, recognizing what's currently within jurisdictional purview. So actually making recommendations and using the evidence to deliberate and come up with funding recommendations. So that would rest within the jurisdictions and is currently out of scope of the advisory panel. So
Thank,
some
yeah.
opportunities for next steps.
Yeah, thank you. Very much a foundational piece of work with more to come.
Absolutely.
We have a request to just go back to the timeline slide again. Maybe, Laura, if you don't mind, we can just go over those timings. And then we have a question about how can industry be involved. So that might fit well. Thank you very much, Kristen and Leah.
Sure. So anything specific, Tamara, you think I should highlight in terms of the timeline?
I'm not seeing anything, just someone that wanted a quick look back at it
Sure.
again. I suppose from my perspective that, and related to the next question about being involvement will be the feedback period, which I'll speak about towards the end of the webinar. So.
Absolutely. So yeah, so around industry support, I think, Tamara, you've just signaled this. This is our intention, and we hope that by having a broad, a long feedback period, we realize it's over the summer, but hopefully 2 months is ample opportunity that we can hear from the diverse parties that have an interest in this work. And so one of the reasons why we wanted to have this information session is to ensure awareness of the upcoming feedback opportunity and really encourage any of our industry colleagues on the call today to respond to that feedback period once it opens in July.
Great, thank you, Laura. So we have one question about that has to do with the evidence, and the other one is more about supporting the jurisdiction. So I'll go to the evidence question first. Many of the studies assessing biomarkers involve sophisticated statistical analysis, which inevitably results in some measure of uncertainty. How should assessment draw a line regarding acceptable versus regarding the acceptable in quotation marks amount of uncertainty?
It's a good question, and one that I think for the moment I'm going to defer until we have the draft framework, because this is something that is currently being discussed by the panel as they're developing the framework. So I don't have an answer for that question now, but anticipate that an answer to that question will show up when the draft is ready.
Great to have that flagged anyway for the team here to comment on it. Uncertainty in the evidence is not new to our agency, so we'll definitely be focused on that.
Exactly.
And a question about discussions going on regarding collaboration between the jurisdictions to do evaluations and to help those provinces that may not always have the resources. So maybe somewhat related to, I guess, one of the objectives of this work about increasing equity. And Laura, I'll just let you take it from there.
Sure. No, that's fantastic. Yeah, and I think this is one of perhaps an indirect outcome of this work has really been pulling the different jurisdictions together and allowing those conversations to happen about how we can work in a more aligned and collaborative way across different jurisdictions. So I think this is naturally happening as part of the discussions that the advisory panel is having. Yeah, again, I think is really where the signals for our organization, our Pan-Canadian approach to come up, to step into that space. That's where these conversations have come up. So it's been great to be able to provide that opportunity for the jurisdictions to learn from one another and share. I can also flag a different table that Canada's Drug Agency is involved in that is likewise supportive of these collaborative discussions across jurisdictions. So we have been working with our Pan-Canadian partners, the Canadian Association of Provincial Cancer Agencies and the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer, to jointly establish a cancer genomics community of practice. And it's the intention for that community of practice, again, to convene and share best practices and learn from one another and understand how we can work more efficiently together. So there's a few different spaces, I guess, to flag where these interjurisdictional conversations are happening.
Great, good question, and thanks for that answer. Similarly, we have another question about whether this work would have an impact on the reimbursement timeline. So another area of Canada's drug agency's work.
Yeah, so I guess this, I could interpret the question in a couple of different ways, one for the reimbursement timeline for drugs, but another for the reimbursement timeline for the biomarker testing. So starting, I guess, on the drug lens of that, I would think absolutely not. That would not be the intention whatsoever. We do have a current program of work that some of you on the call might be aware of called testing procedure assessments. So this is where Canada's Drug Agency, my team, will put together an assessment report on the diagnostic component for drugs that come through with companion diagnostics. We include information like access, availability, cost, some clinical utility, and impact on patients and caregivers. So this is a relatively new program that we started last March, I believe, and again, just focused on companion diagnostics at the moment. These reports do go to our expert committees when deliberating and making reimbursement recommendations for particular drugs. We do anticipate that we will revamp or revise, refine our approach to testing procedure assessments once this consensus-based assessment framework is ready, but it would be the same process that we would produce those testing procedure assessments in line with the current drug reimbursement review process, and this is not intended to slow anything down whatsoever. In terms of the reimbursement timelines for the diagnostic or testing component, and again, I think those processes are currently within jurisdictional purview and outside of the scope of this panel. And again, I don't think there's any intentions to slow anything down. In fact, I think these are spurring conversations around how to make any testing reimbursement decisions more aligned with the timing of drug reimbursement decisions.
Thanks, Laura. I hope that answers the question in the chat, but obviously, like, feel free to put some follow-up questions there. Just giving people a chance to reflect, but I'm not seeing any new questions come in. I could talk about the next steps if people want, and then we could come back to the Q&A if we need to. So shall we go to the next slide? Oh, one more question has just come in. Apologies. Laura, would the framework and advisory panel be positioned to collect and share information on sites which have or are developing testing capabilities of interest, particularly for the novel biomarkers or the technologies? This would go a long way to break down those academic silos that people observe.
So just to make sure I'm understanding the question, could we collect information on where there is current testing capacity? Is that right, Tamara?
Collect and share, yes, yes, it is. That's right.
Okay. So I will say that that's out of scope for the advisory panel. However, this is something that we have been considering within our testing procedure assessment program. When we're putting together testing procedure assessments in support of drug reimbursement reviews, that's a key piece of information. In particular, when the committee deliberates on things such as implementation, feasibility of adoption. And so we have been gathering that sort of information to support our assessments internally and are now considering how we might share that information back out so it can be used by a broader group of folks.
Great, thank you. Hopefully that answers the question. That I like hearing these innovations and these ideas that are sparked by these webinars and these conversations. So appreciate those thoughts of what's possible.
Absolutely.
Um, Maybe I'll go over what our next steps are, and then if people have further questions, they can feel free to answer them. We have lots of time left. Mostly, I wanted to just thank everyone for joining today and for your thoughts, and your questions really help our team and help the advisory panel with their work, because it's good to get some comments that trigger some different thoughts and ideas. We really appreciate your time in joining us as well this day. And thanks, Laura, for your presentation and also answering those questions as they came in. I just wanted to invite everyone to connect with us in the best way that you'd like. And especially if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, or if a question comes to you afterwards, you certainly send it to requests@cda-amc.ca, and that will be triaged to our team, and we can get back to you with an answer. Also wanted to mention that there are two other webinars planned for this month. One aimed at the patient and patient community on Thursday of this week. That's May 15th. And there's one at the end of the month, May 29th, for clinicians. And you are very welcome to share that information with your colleagues or join again. Really appreciate you spreading the word on that. I also, when you go to our website, you can sign up for the weekly updates as one of the choices, and that would be the best place if you wanted to be notified of when the work is available for your feedback. So that would be my recommendation, but of course, we'll be keeping in touch with the registrants of this webinar afterwards. In particular, the recording of today's webinar will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and that link will be sent to you all. Someone has asked, how will the presentations today and the one for clinicians and patients be different? And I would say that the content will be almost identical, but the questions and answers will probably be different. And we also want these groups to have like dedicated time for their questions. So that's the reason. Also on Thursday, the patient member of our advisory panel will be joining us to answer some questions.
Maybe Tara, should I provide just a few high-level comments around the feedback process and what that will look like?
Yes, that would be great. That would be great.
So I think you did mention that the opportunity will be announced through our regular channels, like we're at the weekly dispatch email. So if people are not already signed up to be part of that distribution list, then certainly encourage you to go to our website to sign up so that you'll be informed when the feedback period opens. In terms of the timeline, I think we did flash back to the timeline slide. So the final advisory panel meeting is on June 5th. And then we will have the draft available to support the feedback period after that time, giving the internal team some time to actually refine the feedback based on that meeting. This is why we anticipate that the feedback period will be open at the beginning of July. In terms of a process, so I think many of you are probably familiar with how we commonly obtain feedback. So we will be sharing a document, we will have line numbers on it, you can download it, and then there will be a separate web-based form that will have some predefined questions and ample space to provide any comments that you might have on the draft. Any feedback that we receive over the course of the period will be shared back with the advisory panel before finalizing the framework. And then do also want to indicate that to support transparency, that we will also make publicly available any feedback that we do receive. We would identify any groups or organizations that provide feedback, but not name any particular individual names. So I think those are the sort of the high level kind of comments about what you can anticipate when the feedback period opens. But again, happy to hear any questions that you might
Yeah,
have.
for
Yeah.
sure. And I think that what I liked about that is that the feedback period is open for longer than our normal reimbursement review feedback period. So there is lots of time to gather your thoughts together. And I see one question that's just come in that's somewhat related, I think, to probably when the draft is available that might be answered. But Laura, the question is, will there be criteria when reviewing the evidence to support a given assessment, read the quality of evidence? And then preprint versus peer reviewed, sources of funding, those kinds of quality criteria. Will you be transparent about how those are being considered?
So a good question, and again, something that's currently under discussion with the advisory panel. So certainly is on the table to be setting out what the specific assessment criteria will be, but this discussion is still ongoing about levels or quality or types of evidence. So I appreciate you raising that question, and that's something that we can ensure to tie a bow on when the panel meets for the last time at the beginning of June.
Great, thank you, Laura. And on behalf of Canada's Drug Agency and everyone today, thank you all for joining and for your thoughtful questions and engagement. I think that was really helpful to us as well as I hope it was helpful to you all. And we look forward to hearing from you again during the feedback period. And in the meantime, connect with us any way that works for you. So I think with that, I'll close our webinar for now and let everybody go for lunch. Thank you very much, Laura and the team. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone for your time today.